The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Terra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's certainly a pleasure this afternoon to stand in the House and to speak to the speech from the throne that was tabled in this House last week on March 28th, and but His Honour Lieutenant Governor. I've taken some time to read the speech from the throne. I would only hope that folks at home who weren't able to tune in to the House at the time last week that actually were able to get a copy off the government website and have a read through, because it certainly highlights the plan that we have, the things that we want to do as a government. Mr. Speaker, you know, for I guess 3 weeks now, I've listened to the members opposite talk about and allude, incorrectly I might add, allude to the fact that this government has no plan. Last year, we tabled the way forward, and it certainly highlights there are about 50 actions that encompasses all aspects of the great things that are happening in this province and the things that we need to do to bring this province back on track. And Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we certainly recognized after we took over government after November 30th, 2015, is that, you know, it's been talked about in this House that we have a $2.7 billion deficit. I think it was suggested 2.2. The opposition said in their plan that it was a $1.1 billion deficit. Regardless, Mr. Speaker, significant challenges before us. And one of the things that the Minister of Finance and President of the Treasury Board has certainly pointed out to this Honourable House is that, you know, our fiscal problem was not caused by a drop in oil prices. Rather, Mr. Speaker, it was caused by overspending by the members opposite, by the previous government. Now, Mr. Speaker, you know, as I travel my district, some days I can appreciate that when the members opposite were in government and why they found themselves into that real mess and such a large deficit. The luxury that they had at the time, you know, with upwards of $28 billion in revenue, was to say yes to everything. Yes to this, yes to that. Well, the thing that we inherited and the challenges that I encounter as I travel the district is that we now can't say yes to everything. We have to be strategic about the things that we're going to invest in. And I'm keenly interested, and members opposite now are starting to chirp and respond as I'm speaking, as they generally do when I get up in this Honourable House. They like to chirp in response to some of the things that I would say. So I would say, Mr. Speaker, our province is facing complex, wicked problems that require complex, wicked solutions. Now, I just want to read out a definition of what's a wicked problem, because that's really where we are in this province. A wicked problem is a problem that is difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete, contradictory, and changing requirements that are often difficult to recognize. Now, we've been blamed since we formed government about saying one thing when we ran for office and doing another thing. Well, it goes back to the definition, Mr. Speaker. When you have contradictory or changing requirements or incomplete information, and I know that our Premier wrote the former Premier and asked him, you know, what's the lay of the land? Where are we fiscally? That was done in September of 2015. Of course, that response never came. So we were making an election platform based on the information that we could gather. Now, I know the Leader of the Opposition has said many times, oh, that information was out there. You could get that anywhere. Well, Mr. Speaker, I worked in government. prior to being elected as an MHA. And yes, I knew we had some challenges, but only the Premier of the day and the Cabinet of the day really knew what was going on fiscally in this province. Now, Mr. Speaker, when you think about complex problems, there's the other thing that you have to consider is that there are complex interdependencies. So while you might decide to fix one thing, there is an effect on some other aspect of what's going on in our communities, in our regions, and in the province. So the effort to solve one aspect of a wicked problem may reveal or actually create other problems. And here's where we find ourselves today. I know the Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development talks about that last year we were spending more on debt servicing than we were on education. This year, it was projected, if we look at the forecast that was tabled by the Minister of Treasury Board, that we would pay as much as $1 billion in debt servicing. Now, as I travel my district, and people are saying to me, can you get money to fix this road? Can you get money to fix that road? Can we invest in a new fire hall or a town hall? When you have to take $1 billion, Mr. Speaker, you can't put it in education. I know earlier today it was talked about one of the schools in my district, Riverside Elementary, overcapacity. That's not lost on me, Mr. Speaker. I know there's overcapacity issues there. But as has been said in this House already today, because of the wicked situation we are in, we have had to find creative, cost-effective solutions. So while there might have been promises made, and there were many of them as the election was unfolding, lots of promises that were made by the members opposite, we unfortunately have had to find more creative solutions to the wicked problems that we have inherited. To build sustainability, Mr. Speaker, we must become resilient. This means we must all work together. And you know, last year, I stood in this House and I pleaded with all members opposite and on our side of the House. Let's work together. We recognize that we have a tremendous issue to try to resolve for the betterment of the people of this province. And so we must all work together. Now, I can tell you the way forward, those are some of the things that we have put out there, that we want to be collaborative. We want to work together. We want to row, Mr. Speaker. You know, you're thinking about the history and the culture of this province, that we want to row in the same direction by collaborating and creating stronger partnerships, new partnerships, and more importantly, perhaps, Mr. Speaker, partnerships that have never been thought of at this point. But we must find efficiencies in the programs and the services that we deliver. Mr. Speaker, I've stood in this House before, and I'll reiterate what I say to people in my district. When you think about your budget, there's a few things that you can do. One, you can raise revenue. You can try to generate new revenue. And so we did that last year. We increased taxes, and I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, I heard it, just like all the members, I'm sure, on this side of the House, and most definitely on the other side of the House, that raising taxes and fees get you so far. And we've had a fair amount of opposition. There is no doubt. We've all heard it as we've gone around our districts, that we've had so much opposition to raising taxes and fees. So that's one aspect of when you're trying to balance a budget. Now, the other thing that you can do is you can borrow money. Now, of course, that's tied to our bond rating. And we know that when you go from a plus to a minus, or you move from an A or a double A, or, you know, all of that impacts the amount of interest that we're going to pay to the banks, to our lenders. And so we don't want to do that. As a government, that is not a preferred option for us to go out and borrow more money, because we're giving away more of that, the precious dollars that we need to invest in programs and services. So, Mr. Speaker, the third thing that we can do in terms of trying to balance a budget and to deal with unprecedented deficit is to find efficiencies in the programs and the services that we deliver. And so, Mr. Speaker, that is the option that is before us. And we have seen that in some of the approaches, some of the strategies that have been identified in the way forward. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'll talk just a little bit. In the way forward, we have said that we have a vision that has 3 guiding principles: that we will do better with less, find efficiencies. As I've said already, we will collaborate, but we will also challenge ourselves. We will challenge our departments and our boards, our agencies and our commissions. We will challenge our staff. We'll even challenge the members opposite to find better ways to deliver on the important services and the programs for this province. In the way forward, we've set out 3 different stages of how we're going to move forward our plan for creating a better tomorrow. Securing our footing, we're going to reduce the spending. Realizing our potential. So we want to reverse the negative social and economic indicators, and we've talked about that in this House. And I think about my background. You know, I did a fair amount of work prior to being elected in doing social and economic development in the community. I did a lot of research with places like Memorial University and consulted a lot of community groups and individuals, and I've even written a fair number of papers. And it's all been about social and economic development. But the more important piece, and it goes back to this word about indicators. We can invest all we want in the people and the communities in this province if we don't change indicators. We need to change indicators. And I'm glad to see that we've put that into the way forward. Building our future. And I think this is where members opposite continue to stand up with the fear-mongering that goes on in this House and around the province. And I see members shaking their heads. They're in denial to say that there is no fear-mongering. I can tell you, Madam Speaker, that fear-mongering is a matter of course for members opposite. And so we want to invest in the future of the people of this province, Madam Speaker. We want to redesign our government services, and we want to do it based on the demographics of the province. There is no doubt we've got an aging population. We see that, and has been raised in this House already today, we talk about what's happening in our school systems. Now, we might have overcrowdedness that's happening in some schools, but it's not happening in all schools. Yes, we have growth centres that are happening around the province, but there are some schools, even in my district, Madam Speaker, that do not have overcrowding issues. And I know that some parents, because when we think about Riverside Elementary, and some parents now are taking it upon themselves to go to Random Island Academy because they see that there is an opportunity for their child not to be in an overcrowded area, and it's generally in the common areas in that school, so that they can go to a school which may have a bit more room. So parents are starting to recognize that they need to find creative solutions as well to some of the challenges that are happening in the education system. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I just want to talk a little bit about, as my colleague from the district of Bonavista, he highlighted some of the things that we put forward in the way forward. And when we talk about being more efficient, having a more efficient public sector, and using zero-based budgeting, now that's, I'm sure, novel for members opposite, who remember I said they had $28 billion in oil revenue, they spent like there was no tomorrow, and they just said to departments, you can have, yes, please take, go spend, because we're out in the districts and we want to be able to say yes to everything. Yes to this, yes to that. Well, I can tell you, Madam Speaker, that with zero-based budgeting, now departments will be submitting their requests based on what they actually need. They will build their budgets. There won't be surplus at the end of the year that will be spent because you'd be afraid of not getting the extra money when a new budget came around. Now you will have to identify and make a case for every dollar that will be allocated to your division and your department. And I think that's a great step forward, Madam Speaker. There are no assumptions anymore that you will need this dollar or that dollar. So in terms of us trying to reduce the expenditure, reduce the deficit in this province, that is a wonderful step forward. I also want to talk about in terms of how we provide better services. And one of the things I highlighted in the 50 actions of the way forward is to improve client services, improve services for clients with complex needs. And I think back to my time, Madam Speaker, about when I was involved in the Regional Action Committee on Affordable Housing. And I was involved when, and the previous administration had recognized, and I will certainly give them some kudos for that today, that they recognized that there were individuals in our communities that needed some extra supports, certainly around housing. One of the things that has been recognized as well is that there is a segment of our population that have a combination of issues. And I go back to my earlier definition of wicked problems, that some people, it's not only about finding them somewhere to live, that they also have mental health and addiction issues, and they have poverty, and so there's an interrelationship, and so finding them somewhere to live is only one aspect of that. And so we have identified as one of our 50 actions that we will look to improve the services to clients with complex needs. The REACH Housing Board that I was involved in, and the great work of the housing support worker, last year, or about a year ago, the REACH Housing Board was able to identify a temporary housing situation where they could house people who were without accommodations, without somewhere to go for a short period of time. But they also recognize in their own strategic plan that we have individuals with complex mental health issues, and we need to find other solutions. We need supportive housing. So I know Newfoundland and Labrador Housing Corporation has been undergoing consultations with the community. They want to understand where should their strategic investments and priorities be. And certainly I was at one of the consultations in Clarenville about a month ago, and we quickly identified that we need to continue to find ways to support individuals with complex needs in the community. I got just a couple of minutes now, Madam Speaker, and I just wanted to reference the Premier's Task Force on Improving Education Outcomes. And the task force was in Clarenville, at Clarenville High, on February the 20th. And there were about 30 people who attended, school councils and parents, and they talked about the need to address the issues in the education system. And having been somebody who spent a lot of time in the education system many, many years ago, I certainly appreciate the perspective that they brought to that discussion. We heard in this Honourable House, last week, that there was an idea brought forward, a resolution brought forward to have a summit on inclusive education. And I got to say, Madam Speaker, I went out to the people in my district and I said I thought it was premature to have that summit. It is important for us to hear from the Premier's Task Force on educational outcomes. They will set forward a number of recommendations that we will consider as a government, and we will make the right investments so that we improve educational outcomes, which goes back to one of my earlier points, educational outcomes for the students and their parents in this entire province. So I'm looking forward to that report as it becomes tabled into this House, so that I can go back to the people in my district and I can say the input that you provided to the Premier's Task Force on Educational Outcomes was heard. You were heard. There were some great ideas that came forward, and we as a government will take those serious, and we will make the right investments to fix the mess
Order, please.
that the previous government
Order,
created
please.
in the education in this province. Thank you, Madam
Remind
Speaker.
the